prior to the 1960s and the last waves of the feminist movement in the United States, people commonly believed that boys were had a better aptitude for mathematics and for science than girls did, and that girls were more suited to what we might call the nurturing professions, nursing or elementary education, or what we might think of as more emotive or more nurturing professions. And of course, we know now that this assumption, this widespread stereotypical idea that we had in our culture, is erroneous. For example, and of course, when we looked at gender gaps in mathematics aptitude and science achievement and so forth between boys and girls, we became concerned that educators may have been differentially treating boys and girls based on our stereotypical assumptions about gender, and the ways in which education may have been systematically tracking girls into or away from certain occupations, for example, computer science, which has been receiving a great deal of attention lately. So educators started to pay a great deal of attention to the ways in which they may have been unwittingly treating boys and girls differently and channeling them into different occupational tracks or different professions or different majors. And since educators became aware of these issues, girls have been doing phenomenally. The differences, the gender gap in mathematics scores, for example, on aptitude tests, have virtually been eliminated. And we know that girls do just as well as boys in these areas. When we look at undergraduate majors, the gender gap has narrowed considerably, and it's almost eliminated. However, when we look at higher educational attainment, for example, the awarding of PhDs, we see still large gender gaps and gender differences along the stereotypical lines that you would expect. For example, I think that of all PhDs awarded in the United States currently, only about 20% go to women and 80% go to men, which is a huge difference. So these ideas lead me to think of larger cultural discourses and widespread, more or less common stereotypical notions about women's work and men's work and occupational aspirations that men and women have, which are often, of course, tied to their choice of majors. With respect to gendered majors, I know that my own students often tell me that if I were a woman instead of a man, I would have different career aspirations and I would be choosing a different major. Or the female students tell me that if I were a man, I would be far more concerned about how much money I would be making in my career after college, and I would be pursuing completely different majors than I am today. So we know that with regard to occupational sex segregation in the United States, we still have notions of women's work and of men's work, and we still have ideas that certain occupations may be more suited to women as opposed to men, or that men may be more suited to particular occupations or majors as opposed to women and vice versa. So when you talk about causes for the degree to which you find that majors on college campuses are gendered today, I think this is an extremely complicated question, but I would tend to gravitate more toward a cultural explanation, I think. The great sea change that occurred on college campuses, I think, occurred in the early 1980s when there was began to see increased emphasis on business-related majors and careers, and I think there was some shift. If you go back further, though, I was a child in the 60s, but many of my professors who I took sociology courses from were in sociology departments in the 1960s, and sociology departments were full of both men and women. It wasn't considered a gendered major. It wasn't necessarily considered a major that would lead to the kind of the helping side of the social services profession. Students were very dynamic, very engaged, very politically oriented, very aware, and very concerned about some of the common problems facing the United States in the 60s, and sociology seemed to provide answers to students' common questions. And so sociology was an extremely popular major then. And then I think there was I think the sea change occurred in the early 1980s, and I know that in the last 6 years since I've been here at Western, I haven't seen any great changes. I think that in the United States there was a shift toward conservatism in the country, and that's when Western felt it was necessary, for example, to build Parks Hall across the way here, which was the business school, to accommodate courses for the business school. And what some academics think about, I know probably some academics in the humanities who might say that these are more job preparation careers, accounting, business administration and management, human relations, and so on. But there was a dramatic rise, an increase in demand for majors in the business school as opposed to other colleges on campus.